Hello, everybody. My name is Sergio Araneda, and I am rehearsing the presentation I will give tomorrow at the ITC conference about the experiential approach to test design and validation. This is a presentation within a session about Hispanic American perspectives on the concept of validity. And yeah, today I want to speak to this idea I called experiential approach. I developed this during my dissertation time, and hopefully I will give a reasonable case for why this approach makes sense and what are the novel things on this approach. So the experiential approach ultimately is trying to connect with the experiences of test takers and trying to create a validation framework that is coherent with priority on test takers and their experiences. The idea came from my engagement with game design, and initially when I was in my graduate studies, when I was in grad school, I wanted to do game-based assessment. But when I started to look at the things that you could do in terms of validation work in relationship with game-based assessment, particularly the way you design a game versus how you design a test, the difference was so clear. When you design a game, usually you focus a lot on the experience that you generate when you design a game. But when you design a test, you really don't care much about that. So then the question is, well, how can you transfer this approach to design in general that is phenomenological in nature and use that in educational testing? And if you do that, then what happened with validity? Like, do you need to change your procedure to validate a test when you build it that way, etc.? I've written at least three pieces of research. One is my dissertation, one is a preprint about a conceptual framework for test taker experience, and another is a paper that we wrote with Steve, making the case for the experiential approach, trying to explain it a little bit more. Today, I will give you like an overview of what is this approach and the base of it. So, as I said, the experiential approach is an attempt to do a phenomenological approach. What phenomenological means that you are centered around how people perceive and experience things. And yeah, the idea is to bring that epistemological, if you want, up to certain points, not just epistemological, but trying to be more coherent with a phenomenological perspective in all these other things that you do in testing. So this is a video on TikTok of someone that was kind of like, we'll just click here just for you to kind of like see. Um, this is like a video of a person representing like all the things that happen in an emotional test taker and all these interactions that happen actually when you take a test, and it's so weird actually that we haven't given like a proper space to all that phenomenon that happen when you're taking the test and give that a reasonable place um, when you do this. So the the experiential approach is trying to correct that somehow bias, if you want, against this phenomenological point of view when you design and validate. So the Hispanic roots, probably there are multiple philosophical bodies that I read and connected as I was developing this idea, but definitely the more Hispanic part of it is participatory action research. So when you build knowledge with this phenomenological vocation, then you quickly realize that you cannot just accept your own insights and go with it and do research about whatever you think. You need to connect and you need to talk and you need to make the subjects protagonists in the research that you are doing. And because sometimes there is experience that is not fungible, meaning that you cannot really explain what happened in your experience. You are the only one that can carry that and really truly understand that. So even if you try to empathize, it's not going to be enough. You need to let people participate that is coherent with a phenomenological take. And many of these ideas came from Hispanic America. And Falsborda is one of the authors of this book, Action and Knowledge, that propose ideas on how to do this type of research that is called participatory action research. Also, it's very clear that my origins come from Chile. I started in college admission in Chile. Many of this idea of experience come from the bad experience that people had with college admission and the test use the PSU test that now was changed, but still this idea of like empathizing. In Chile, I guess it was very obvious that you needed to empathize in the process of developing a test. So what is the experiential approach? If you see in perspective, like the history of validity theory, you find these definitions, Borsman definition that is thinking about a test that is valid, the American school that is denying that and say, no, you don't validate the test, you validate interpretation and uses, and you see validity as a degree to which evidence and theory support interpretation of the scores for proposed uses. Now, Lane and Marion change a little bit that definition, but still it's very similar in terms of like evidence and theory, interpretation and uses, etc. And but all of that is lacking this idea of the phenomenological part. And the experiential approach is trying to put that up, make upside down that process and really focus on put the test taker experience first. So in essence, the approach basically is proposing that you, as a validation strategy, you should first learn from the experiences of your stakeholders, test takers, and others. Then, from what you learn from the experiences, generate invalidity hypotheses about what you will do in your test, and then organize that as an argument that can respond to those concerns, and then prioritize among the hypotheses and things that you need to study and respond to those concerns from the research. So the main difference, and this is there are differences at the level of the concept of validity, but at least from the validation point of view, the main difference is that the process of question generation is scrutinized and is based on user experience. So you do not go and research whatever you know that you need to do, like factor analysis or diff. Sure, all of that can stay. However, you prioritize whatever the people are saying in their experiences as important and meaningful. And sometimes you, as an expert, will need to mediate that because you, as an expert, will understand that maybe something that a person is saying may have some implications for validity that maybe they are not aware of, but you can realize. But that process of like hypothesis generation and question, like what's going to be the guide of the argument that you're going to do later, is driven by experiences. So that's the essential, quintessential um, proposal and difference from this approach to others, because other proposals they they don't enter into the detail of like question generation. They enter into like how to respond and how to organize evidence, but not necessarily about like how you generate questions. And multiple sources of people that have been talking about like the relationship of power and knowledge, about experiences, like so many all this branch of philosophy around phenomenological and or empathetic ways of knowledge building mention that question generation probably is even more important than the evidence gathering because that's where you can hide question, you can highlight question. That's a level that is terribly important. If you compare like traditional validation with experiential approach, probably you will see that we are trying to intentionally be more phenomenological, trying to bring this idea from feminist epistemology, so the standpoint, situated knowledges, um, see the examinees as epistemic agents and not just subjects. There are multiple constructs of difference. This is like a graphic I developed for my dissertation in which I did this exercise of like, let's read what people are saying about this test, let's generate invalid hypotheses, let's try to organize an argument. And you see multiple differences. There are a lot of deviation when you do this process. First of all, you realize that you cannot just stay with whatever is quote unquote technical about the test. There are many concerns that are more relative to normative issues, things that are comparative in nature, things that are also more about like critical thinking, kind of like critical race theory type of way of thinking, but beyond race sometimes, that people bring about the test, and not just the test, but also about specific parts of the test. So the process also brings a richer understanding of the type of argumentation that you need to make that is not just technical. And also not just about like one single monolithic thing you call test, but like all the different pieces that are identified by users in the process. This is a graphic of the conceptual framework I have for test taker experience that I developed to analyze the data coming from experiences. It has three principles: sense making, interaction, and continuity. I presented 2 years ago in Grenada about this model. And yeah, that was a key part of the process of like even trying to conceptualize how to do this, how to operationalize in practices this experiential approach. I don't have that much time, but the philosophical grounds of this approach are in standpoint theory, situated knowledges, participatory action research, which I mentioned, rhetorical argumentation is very important. In the experiential approach, it makes sense to devise an argument that is designed also again based on the experience that you generate. And philosophy of technology, I talked yesterday about, no, I will talk tomorrow about, I will talk on Thursday, sorry, about philosophy of technology, which is a separate thing, but kind of related with all of this. I will need to pass very quickly from here because I don't have that much time. Um, why this is a new approach? Because we intentionally we find an address in situated knowledges as the epistemic engine of the approach. That's different from any other approach that you see there. And my Hispanic positionality in all of this, I guess there is some sense of a shared sense of pain coming from a colonizer project of science and the world. That when you are from Hispanic America, you can see like the colonizer gaze, or you're more sensitive to it, or you can visualize it. Um, and definitely the situated knowledges and the feminist, they provided a lot of philosophy to include that the colonial perspective as well as many other emancipatory views into knowledge construction. Some references, and yeah, well, you can find the slides in my personal website in the section conferences. Here are some links to the papers I mentioned. Happy to talk more about this topic. I really love all about the experiential approach. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.